Welcome to the Filmed Live Musicals podcast, a podcast about stage musicals that have been legally filmed and publicly distributed. The Filmed Live Musicals website contains information on nearly 200 musicals that have been captured live. Check it out at filmedlivemusicals.com. And now, on with the show. Welcome to the Filmed Live Musicals podcast. I'm your host, Luisa Lyons, and my guests today are Grammy-winning musicians Cathy Fink and Marcy Marxer, composers and stars of the new short musical All Wigged Out, which tells the story of Marcy's diagnosis, treatment, and recovery from breast cancer. Welcome, Cathy and Marcy.
Thank you, Luisa. We're so happy to be here, see you, and do this. This is wonderful.
That was Marcy, and just so you can tell who's who, I'm the other one.
Thank you. So you have been together as partners and musicians for over 40 years. How did you meet?
We met in July of 1980 at a folk festival in Toronto, Ontario. And Marcy was touring at the time with an all-female string band, humorously called the Bosom Buddies String Band. And I was doing some solo touring from the US, but having previously spent 7 years living in Canada and starting my career there. And we were, as is often the case in folk festivals, thrust into many of the same workshops and events at the festival. And then you go back to the hotel and have a little food and break into jam sessions in people's hotel rooms. And that's really where we bonded, was in some of those jam sessions. And throughout the summer, we met up at many other festivals and literally sort of made a plan. Her band and I really bonded, and we made a plan to figure out how we could help each other out. So I booked her band for a week that fall in the Washington, D.C. area to play square dances and concerts and do workshops. And they booked me, you're going to love this, in Michigan in January for concerts and school programs and other stuff. And this big friendship really blossomed. But additionally, Marcy and I became very close. We started doing some duo gigs together. We still had lots and lots of separate things. But by 1983, we had pretty much made the decision that what we most wanted to do was live together and play music together and make that the life's work. And 40 years later, we're still doing it.
That is so beautiful. I as you were talking, I got chills. Like, that's such a beautiful story. Like, how you found each other through music and have kept that going.
We sure did. And
Lucky me.
My band broke up and I joined a band in San Francisco. But what I would find was, even though that band was touring, if Cathy had one weekend of work that I could do with her, I'd rather just can the band in San Francisco and go do that one weekend with her. So I gravitated towards the DC area as fast as I could.
Yeah, it was great.
And that's where you're both based now?
Yeah, we live in Silver Spring, Maryland. And part-time, we also have a beautiful house on top of a mountain in Lansing, North Carolina, which there's a musical connection to. And that was that was where we hunkered down through COVID. And minus the horror of COVID, the concept of lockdown was phenomenal for us because it's the first time in our lives we slept in our own bed every night and cooked every single meal. And we were incredibly productive. We ran 18 online music festivals of all different kinds of genres. We wrote lots of songs. We played music all the time. It was sort of like, oh, we can do this without being on the road. And we like being on the road because that's where we met our friends from all over the world. But it was kind of like, oh, we can do this. And it gave us a chance to do some other hobbies that you don't have time for when you're on the road. So, that was interesting. And we've, needless to say, sort of carefully come out of it because as a cancer patient during COVID and eventually now a survivor, Marcy, we've stayed very vigilant around the fact that we're aware that people are still getting COVID. It's not as devastating thanks to the immunizations. Most people who get COVID recover in a week or two, but we know some folks who've still gotten the long thing. And now that I'm a cancer patient, we're right back to the hardcore vigilance. So, you just figure out how you can do what you can do with what's out there.
Yeah. And how extraordinary that the technology. I always think it's amazing that COVID happened when it did, that Zoom and like online, the accessibility of video and online community has never been as accessible as it has been in the past few years. And it's extraordinary what that has made possible.
Well, it also made possible All Wigged Out, the way it unfolded, because we started writing it pre-COVID, and we brought in a wonderful co-writer, our friend Andy Offit-Irwin, who is an award-winning professional storyteller and very much in our inside circle. And we did a bunch of readings in a few places. We brought in a director from Nevada, Allegra Lee Bonatti, did a bunch of readings, got to a place where we felt like, yeah, this is worth pursuing, let's go for it. And we got into the Capitol Fringe Festival with All Wigged Out. And then COVID came and Capitol Fringe was canceled. And we were a little, disappointed. We're in another world. We go to a lot of theater, we love theater, but we're not in the inside workings of theaters here. And so we just sat on it for a little bit. And about 5 months later, when it looked like, oh, COVID might never end, I woke up one day and I said, there's another way. We can film this. And if we film it in front of a live, vaccinated, masked audience, if we film it, we can serve more people with what this film has to say. And, we still dream of getting into a theater and doing an actual theater run. But what we realized is that, when theaters closed down, they already had their 2-year backlog of what they wanted to do, and they had the show they closed on. And we'd be behind that 2-year backlog with a great big maybe. And I thought, if we film it, we've captured it. We can disseminate the entertainment and the information. And if something else happens, great. But if it's going to be 5 years before we see that something else happen, we have moved on to other projects. This isn't the only thing that we do. So that was sort of the beginning of trying to turn this into a film, because it was meant to be a live theater piece. And we weren't willing to not have a live audience. That was a challenge. But we were very, very lucky to hook up with some friends that we had met 20 years earlier in the children's music world, a company called HMS Media, an Emmy Award-winning media company in Chicago who frequently is in New York filming Broadway shows. And they loved the idea. They were extremely helpful in helping us reshape it for this purpose, brought in a director that they worked with a lot who knew a lot of the players involved on their team. And then coming back to what you said about Zoom and technology, for 2 months, we rehearsed with the director on Zoom. She was in Evanston, Illinois. We were in Lansing, North Carolina. We edited the script with a lot of her direction. We changed things. We invented new things, but we did that rehearsal for 2 months on Zoom twice a week. And then Marcy and I rehearsing in between before we even met in person.
This is Tracy Walsh?
Tracy Walsh, yeah. She was fantastic. And then, using our networking from the music community, some amazing fans from Chicago who we had never met, they had seen us do a kids concert online once, offered up their home. They were going to be gone for the summer. And they said, we live in this Frank Lloyd Wright house in Chicago, and it's going to be empty for 2 months. Would you like to live in our house? Okay, we'll do that. And, so many pieces of wonderful generosity, wonderful serendipity. We got referrals from friends in Chicago for musicians, and along comes Stacy McMichael on bass, whose mother had been through breast cancer during COVID, and Janet Kramer on drums, who had been through her own cancer scenarios. And we didn't know them in person. I interviewed them on the phone. I said, I know you've got the skills. I want to make sure that the vibe is right. And they were all,
they were highly recommended. We didn't start out to have a female band, but these people were highly recommended. And I had a couple of other names first to call, so I called them and I wasn't getting calls back. And then we ended up with Janet and Stacy, and they were fabulous.
It was really perfect, really
Yeah.
perfect, and
a good combination. I'm glad it was a female band. After we settled in with them, I never thought about it again.
Well, and we loved them so much when the show was over, even though everybody was exhausted. We basically filmed the show twice in front of a live audience. That's it. We had to build the set, that complex, beautiful set with all the lighting Todd Clark did. That was built in under 48 hours in a dance studio because all theaters were closed. And we had a walkthrough on set before we filmed, but no full rehearsal. I
But
know
we've done shows for years, and you know how that is with theater. It's like you're so used to just doing the whole show. So many people have asked us how it went with editing, scene by scene by scene, how it seems to flow. Well, it flows because we just did it.
Yeah, I mean,
start to finish.
If there was a big flub, we could go back and do a pickup. But we did
and that only happened once.
We did very few of those, and we filmed a Saturday night show and a Sunday afternoon show, and then 2 days later, we went into a studio in Chicago to make a cast album because Stacy and Janet were had become so much a fabric of what we were doing. We didn't want the cast album to come from the show itself because there are some songs like All Wigged Out and Jesus Is My Backseat Driver where there's more verses, and we shortened them for the purpose of the show, but we had an opportunity in the studio to add more harmonies, add more instruments, add more verses, go have more fun.
Cool.
So there is an All Wigged Out songs from the musical CD, and you can also download it from our Bandcamp page or from one of the evil other places. and that was really fun to make too, and really lucky. So that was sort of a crazy process. I called Scott at HMS probably in early February. We spent the month of July in Chicago, and by October we had an edited film to start entering into film festivals and shopping around.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I have so many questions. So going back a little bit, you mentioned Todd Clark's scenic and lighting design. I was so intrigued by these beautiful colored balls of light that are across the whole stage. What was the inspiration for those lights, and who came up with that idea, and how was that all executed?
Todd came up with that idea himself. He was trying to we knew that we needed to keep the set exactly the same as it was, but in order to change the mood and to change the place, he would change the colors of these orbs and change the placement. And we didn't even really get to see it until afterwards, since we only did two passes through we saw them hanging them and practicing with them, but we didn't really know what he was going to do. And he was just a genius. He was in it as you hope someone on your team is, not just on your team, but 150%, both feet, everything in it. He really was.
Yeah, Todd had sent us drawings and ideas. And then when we got to Chicago early on, Todd, Matt Hoffman, the director of photography, and Scott Silberstein came to rehearsals. They didn't come to every rehearsal, but they came to 4 or 5 rehearsals to see how things were moving forward, to talk about what might help them, to give a couple of suggestions. And in Todd's case, I think that ended up driving the train in terms of, what's the set going to look like? What are the different things that we need to accomplish? How do we need to feel like we're in a different place here or there? I mean, honestly, one of my favorite moments is when Marcy, besides Marcy dancing in the chemo chair, is when Marcy's sitting in the chemo chair and the IV drops down.
Yeah.
And that tells you where you are. Because in a wheelchair, you might not know that. But when the IV drops down, you know exactly where you are, And I think Todd was, the more theater we go to, and we go to a lot of theater, unless it's one of these gigantic productions, you're seeing more and more top-notch theater use less and less on stage, and very effectively. And I think Todd was brilliant at doing that. he had to pre-program all of those lighting cues, and he had very little time to do it. And even at the end in the outtakes, there were a couple of things where those were not pre-programmed. He just did something wacko that was really, really fun. And I have to say that the whole time we were in this, we just felt the deep support of the whole team. They all believed in the story, and they all believed in the power of the story and the purpose of the story.
Yeah. With HMS Media, they've, like you mentioned, they film lots of the B-roll for the Broadway musicals and the touring productions. They also did another capture of Peter Pan, a musical adventure at Chicago Shakespeare Theater. What When you were negotiating with them, are they part of the process of the distribution as well?
They're not, and they didn't have any connections to distribution whatsoever. So we had an initial connection to a distributor through a photographer friend of ours. And we initially signed a deal with them to distribute us to film festivals. They specialized in LGBT films. It seemed like a fit, even though we don't. There's an LGBT story, a 40-year love story within All Wigged Out, but it's not the centerpiece of the story. It just as many people's heterosexual marriages are not the centerpiece of a story. They just happen to be married in that story. Well, what we really learned was a couple of things. The marketplace that they dealt with wanted sex, drugs, and videotape or something in a way that is not part of what we do.
I mean, entertaining, yes,
but entertaining, but a different marketplace. And number two, their hearts weren't really in it. You know, they basically entered things through Film Freeway, but didn't use any of their personal contacts. And that's why you sign with a distributor, is because they have a connection. And I went back to them after a couple of months through the suggestion of a friend of mine. And I said, maybe you should try entering this as a documentary instead of an LGBT film, because that's how it was shown at the National Women's Music Festival. And when we show the film, when we screen the film, as often as possible, part A is screen the film, part B is a Q&A with us and someone from a cancer support organization local to that community, or something else that's very relevant. You know, an organization that we feel the community would benefit by knowing who they are, and who may also be bringing in some of their own people, and a conversation about health advocacy, wellness, you know, a lot of other things. And then we participate in that, and we do some live music.
And the hospitals don't often know about these other groups that are there for support. They can be anything from a free wig to rides to emotional support to caregivers support.
Yeah, and we'll come back to that.
And which, I mean, it's just so important. So it's great to be able to bring that in.
Yeah, it's sort of part of the community effort behind using All Wigged Out as a tool, not just a piece of entertainment. Anyway, when I went back to them and said, how about entering this as a documentary? They said, we're done. And they, you know, gave it all back to us. And so that was early July. And the next weekend, I learned how to use Film Freeway, and I started entering us into film festivals, and we started getting into them, and we started getting awards, entering it as a documentary, and sometimes getting awards in other things, like the Cannes World Film Festival gave it Best Health Film. And
you've won like Best Feature Documentary at multiple awards, the 8.5 Film Awards, Sweet Democracy Film Awards, New York Movie Awards, Stanley Film Awards.
Yeah, and then recently we just got a viewer's choice at Cinema Sisters Film Festival, which was really nice. So many of these were online because it was COVID time, but when we can get to one in person, we do. And we went up to the New Haven Documentary Festival. It was a great time. And, you know, it's very validating. And I felt like, well, okay, you know, we've seen this in the music industry. Not every distributor gets it, and you just move on, you know. Yeah. But that gave us some awesome visibility to do other things. For one thing, with and without a distributor, we've been touring with the film and doing screenings, followed by those kinds of Q&As, like, and in places that you don't expect it. Wintergrass Music Festival, which is a bluegrass and folk festival out in Seattle, screened the film. And then we had a Q&A with 2 other cancer survivors and Marcy and myself, and a little bit of live music. And it was amazing. And they want to do it again. We're going back there this in 2024. We were at the North Carolina Museum of Art in their film series. And we partnered with the Rex, which is a big health center near them. And the woman in charge of wellness for the Rex was in the Q&A with us. And that was really nice. We went to California for you're going to love this, Silicon Valley Rainbow Chamber of Commerce. And the partner there was a cancer support community and I think also a hospital involved in the Q&A, and they always have information out in the lobby. You never know who you're helping. And I will tell you that when we started doing this post-COVID lockdown, one of the things that we always talked about is, and particularly at the National Women's Music Festival, since it was still during a lot of COVID, everybody had to stay masked. I said, how many of you, we had 700 people in the audience, how many of you during COVID just passed on getting your mammograms? 3/4 of the hands went up. I said, if we do nothing else of importance today, everybody make that commitment that on Monday, you're going to make the call and schedule your next mammogram. Marcy's cancer was found in a mammogram. There was no other hint. My cancer, which of course wasn't an issue at the time, again, found in a regularly scheduled mammogram, which neither of us would ever miss. And I'm lucky that they found it. My doctor said there's no way you could have found this in a self-exam. She couldn't have found it. It was in the mammogram. Yeah. And if we do nothing but inspire women to stay on top of their own health in a positive way, that's a great thing. But of course, we know we're doing other things. The first time we did a reading, we were at a friend's house, and he had invited every medical person he knew, including his private physician, female physician. And Marcy finished the mammogram scene, and she just burst out, "That's exactly how it goes. You nailed it." And I'm like, the men in the room are going, "Oh my God, that's what they go through?" And the women are like, "Uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh."
I was actually in the grocery store in North Carolina, and this woman caught my eye, and she waved at me, and she said, "Guess what I did this morning?" And she kind of struck the mammogram pose.
Yeah, the detail of like tilt your head, lift your arm, shuffle a little closer. Okay, now I'm just gonna gently pull you in. It's like there's nothing gentle about this. There's
That's right.
No,
and there's no place for your face with those things. There's this big thing where your face should go.
And I actually audio taped my mammogram that year. So the script came from that. I looked at the technician. I said, "You don't mind if I turn my phone on? I'm not making video, but I just need the script, And she laughed her head off. We had all the beeping noises and the whole thing. It was hilarious.
Yeah. If I have one wish for science, it's how can we figure out how to make these scans less painful and uncomfortable. I have that for a mammogram and also for bone marrow biopsies. Can we figure out a way to test marrow without doing a biopsy, please?
Absolutely. That is crazy. So
unbelievably
crazy.
Painful and so uncomfortable. And I think something that I love that you've been showing this to medical professionals too, that it's not just for other cancer survivors, that I think people who do this every day, the heroes that they are, but they can forget how it becomes so routine for them, and to remember how scary it is and how uncomfortable it is and how confronting it is to go through these, like everyday inverted commas procedures. And for people to, the way that you show all of this in the musical, like with such humor and with such warmth, reminds people of the humanity behind the experience of cancer.
We look forward to more opportunities for medical professionals to see this. The American Nurses Association, right off the bat, rented the film for an entire month for their entire population. Like they had a link they could go to. And we did 2 different Q&A discussions with them online. And It was really awesome because you had nurses who've been through cancer, you've had nurses who've taken care of people with cancer. The response was really quite beautiful. And often it's the nurses who have the nurturing when the doctors are just taking care of business. Although
And it's the nurses who explain things to you. Sometimes doctors will rattle off numbers and letters, and you go to the nurse and go, "What?" And they explain it to you.
Yeah, but along those same lines, and All Wigged Out became very obvious to us that the wig shops play a special role. And in our case, um, a conversation that we had with, there's a character named Cindy in All Wigged Out. Her real name is Sandy, and we're still seeing her. She just cut my hair real short, and she's making a halo on a headband of my real hair to wear under a baseball cap. And she once said to us at a visit, what happens is the doctors don't want to give you the bad news, and then people come in here and we have to tell them the real deal. And, that's not every doctor, but it's a lot. And one of the things that we try to do is empower people to hold the reins to the extent that is possible, to know what questions to ask. I mean, we have a friend who was just recently diagnosed, and we're setting up an appointment to go visit her and say, ignore any of this, it doesn't matter to you, but there's some things that you won't know to ask. And here's that list. And doctors are going to act like they're omnipotent, and you're going to tell them that you need more information.
We appreciate the ones who communicate beautifully. We had some great experiences with surgeons and nurses. It's so important for them to be able to communicate. One of my favorite moments in the filming process also was for caregivers. Um, a man called me over. His wife had a wig on and a mask, and everybody was masked in that area, but she looked like she was in treatment. And he called me over after the first filming, and he put his arm around his wife, and he just said, "I'm her Cathy." So the caregiving, and also I see this as for uh, experience. If people are not experienced with cancer, with caregiving, um, I find that the longer I'm a patient, the better patient I know how to be. And if I had seen this going in, I think I would have had some skills behind me and some confidence that I wouldn't have had, that I didn't have. So I think it's just really important to get the experience when you can. And I tried watching movies with cancer patients in them, and most of them were pretty dreadful in my opinion. And they've probably, some of them have been really big hits too, but they didn't give me the support that I was looking for, or the kind of information that I was looking for. And that really influenced how we put this together.
We wanted it not to be a bummer. We wanted it to be an honest film, but we wanted a lot of entertainment and a lot of chuckles and a lot of reality and a big dose of how to deal with reality. When Marcy used the word patient, one of the things that we've both learned through this is there are so many definitions of patient. As a caregiver, I had no idea that I had this well of patience to draw on. But I had to draw on way more patience than I had ever used in my life. I consider that to be a gift. I'm glad I found it. I'm glad I used it. I happen to need it right now as a patient myself. But then you also have to know when you run out of patience and they just need to get something done. And what we've seen since COVID is, hey, a lot of these hospitals are stripped of personnel. They don't have the same number of doctors and nurses to each patient that they once had. They're dealing with a new paradigm. That means we're dealing with a new paradigm. And in my opinion, it puts more on the patient to handle their own advocacy. I'm going to say openly that it took me about 3.5 weeks to wrangle my oncology team into the kind of unit I want to work with. And I'm very happy with them. But if I hadn't been proactive, I'd be seeing a different nurse every time I go. I'd see my oncologist twice in the course of 12 weeks, and a number of other things. And the same thing with the caregivers. You know, another friend of mine whose wife was diagnosed about 6 years ago. As soon as we knew what was going on, I called him and I said, Mark, I want to give you some info as a caregiver. Number one, you're going to have to find some things that take care of you. You cannot do this and last if 100% of your attention is on your partner. Whether it be musical or otherwise. In my case, I got to do something wonderful that I'd always wanted to do, and because we're never home, I couldn't do, and that was take up quilting. And I got a grant to learn from a really phenomenal quilter, and I made a bunch of amazing story quilts, and I loved doing it, and some friends of mine are quilters, and we worked on projects together. And the bonus is, hey, this was something I could do in the living room while Marcy's on the couch watching a movie. We can watch the same movie. I can do that. I end up with something I've always wanted to do. You got to find those things, you know. And the other thing is, you really learn to live one day at a time and find the joy in that day. One of the things that we absolutely do every single day right now is we have a gratitude practice, usually in the morning and the evening, where we're talking about who and what we're grateful for. And we also have another practice that we call Power to the People. Our friends who are struggling with cancer, with other health issues, with stuff.
Any kind of issue.
And we just focus on sending them the good vibes. And, you know, the thing about All Wigged Out is it's kind of power-packed in 58 minutes, but it does the trick. And it was HMS that really pushed hard for the keep it in the 60-minute range. If we do it in the theater sometime, and I hope we do, we've got a bunch of other scenes that we could come up with. I'll talk about one scene, though, because it was all written, and we were editing and editing and editing, and sometimes we would just goof off with Tracy on Zoom. And Marcy says, oh my God, you should see the My Chemo bag they gave me at the hospital. And that wasn't in the film. That wasn't in the script. And Tracy says, what My Chemo bag? And Marcy runs upstairs, she gets it. And there's this red zipper bag that you see. And Tracy just lost it.
It was hilarious. In fact, when I was in chemo, we were all in one big room. There are multiple chairs all in one. Now that Cathy's in chemo, they have separate rooms, which is kind of nice with a curtain and a door that closes. It's quieter, that's for sure. You don't hear people having conversations on their phones and things. But they came to the room where everyone was sitting with their support people mostly, and they only handed these red bags out to the breast cancer patients. So they said the breast cancer patients, and then they named it like this one, and this one. And, you know, I'm a musician in the DC area, and everywhere I go, people know me, you know. And I just felt so odd about it. And as she was leaving the room, I said, I always like to be inconspicuous in the hospital. So here I am with this big red bag with My Chemo bag written on it. And the nurse didn't laugh. She just looked at me kind of oddly and walked out. But everybody else in the room just cracked up. So, I mean, any way you can make fun of anything, go ahead and do it. It helps other patients. I used to like take my IV pole and walk around and talk to people and, you know, hand them a lollipop if they wanted one, or you know, a lemon drop. And it was a very different situation. But you know, anytime we can crack fun at anything, even the very first moment when my doctor said to me, over the phone, it's positive, and I, for a brief moment, I went, great. Positive. Oh, and then when she said, yeah, positive is good. It's like, well, not really. So everything seemed backwards and odd to me at the same time going through treatment. There were times when I felt like the treatment was so inhuman that I was being invaded by aliens from from space and taken over. And I would just go out. One time I went out in the flower garden at the hospital, which, you're not really supposed to walk on, but I walked out there and kneeled down and just looked at the flowers like, give me some nature. But it's a different kind of a thing to be out of control. Like you feel like you might be in control, but you're really not in control. Which was the reason why the car wash scene came in. I actually said that to my doctor. She said, "How are you doing today?" I said, "Well, I feel like I'm being dragged through a car wash." And then she laughed, and I said, "No, I'm being serious," because I'd been trying to make her laugh for a long time, and it really wasn't working. And then she caught on that I was trying to make her laugh, and she would laugh at things that In fact, one time I pushed it to the limit and trying to make her laugh, and she said, she turned her back to me, went to the computer, and said, "What's the date today?" And I thought, that's odd. The doctor doesn't know the date. And I had worn a Rasta hat with fake dreadlocks hanging down. And then when she turned her back, I took that off and I had a ring of flowers around my head. And she said, "What's the date?" And she types the date in and she said, "Who's the president of the United States?" And I thought, this is not going where I meant. I better start behaving now because she's going to lock me up or take my driver's license away. So,
Girls got no sense of humor.
yeah, it was even that in itself is kind of funny, that you have to work so hard. But then I realized that they're trying to save your life, and that's the only thing on their mind sometimes. Whereas you're trying to live your life, and that's kind of the only thing on your mind.
And they're trying to save your life with data.
Yeah. But those things are not the same, not at all the same.
Yeah, it's, chemo and radiation they're life-saving, but the long-term effects after you've had those treatments are very debilitating. Like pre my transplant, I had perfect teeth, and then I had full body radiation and chemo, and I've since had like 15 fillings and 3 root canals because my teeth have deteriorated as a direct result of chemo. So
yeah,
like, yes, I'm still here, but I'm slowly crumbling, literally. I love the scene in All Wigged Out where you're talking about dealing with neuropathy and not being able to play your instruments, and then filling out the questionnaire about neuropathy. And can you pick up a dime? And this really moving and devastating moment where you've dropped the guitar pick, and the way you move to pick that up. And I think, again, finding that humor and finding that ability to laugh at yourself when you can't do like things that you've taken for granted for so long and that seem every day, and it's suddenly like your body can't do what it used to be able to do.
Well, absolutely. And I'd played guitar since I was 5. I mean, for me, not being able to use my hands was the very last thing to go. And so the oncologist would say every week, "Well, how you doing?" I'd say, "Well, I can't play music." And for me, that was like, I'm totally desperate.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, after hearing that for about 3 weeks, she just rolled her eyes and said, "Well, has it influenced your life in any other ways?" And I said, "Well, I can't wear pants. I can't pull them up. If a blanket slides down, I can't pull it. I can't pull it up to get warm. I can't button a button. I can't zip a zipper." And she kind of went, "Oh." And that meant something to her. But I didn't realize that what I was saying to her was, I can't play music. It didn't make sense to her. It didn't seem like a priority.
Even though her husband's a guitar player.
Yeah, her husband's a
God help them. But but actually that has informed me a lot, because from day one, meeting my oncologist and everybody else on the oncology team, they ask me every week, any hints of neuropathy? And my answer is, the second I have a hint of neuropathy, you're not going to need a telephone to hear about it. And we will be making another plan. And we were clear with the oncologist that this was devastating. The other thing that we've learned is that, even though they do everything according to the data, what they don't have is data on other scenarios. They don't have data on what happens if I go through 10 rounds of this chemo instead of 12, because they just didn't do the protocol. They don't have data on if I go through 6. Maybe 6 does the same thing as 12. But it's expensive to do these protocols. It's an ordeal, blah, blah, blah. So they did it on 4, 12, and 18. And, Marcy's oncologist pulled the plug at 11 out of 12. And Marcy had an amazing response. She said, if I need 12 to save my life, that's what I'm going to do. I'm on 11. We're there. And the doctor looked at her and said, well, there's no data that says 12 is better than 11 is better than 10. And we take this Hippocratic oath to do no harm, at which point Cathy's thinking, too late. And
Marcy's thinking, well, she said she was doing more harm than good. And so I thought, well, I do have the extra bonus of this other chemo that I'm going to be on for a year and then the 5 years of another chemo. So maybe I can move on from this one.
But it was, and that's informed me a lot, because when we met with my oncologist, I said, we now know that you don't have data on 10. But if at 9 I'm feeling neuropathy, we're going to talk about 10. And luckily, so far, I'm doing great. I mean, I got side effects. Everybody gets side effects. But so far, I'm lucky. But also, I have learned from Marcy's scenario how to make people listen every time you talk.
She's more of a city girl. I'm more of a Midwestern girl, where the old joke is, how do you get a bunch of drunken, rowdy Midwesterners out of a pool? You go over to them and say, would you please get out of the pool? And they do. And
and my method would be, hey, everybody out.
Everybody out there, calling the cops.
Although I did that for Marcy plenty of times.
Yeah,
and, her oncologist became clear that I was at every meeting. I mean, we talk about that in the film. And even when the meetings went to Zoom, I wouldn't be on camera, but she knew I was around the corner. And at the end, she'd go, does Cathy have anything to add? Correct question. Do you have more questions about the film?
I feel like we've talked a lot about what I wanted to ask you. I wanted to ask, as you're both professional musicians, and for a lot of people, music therapy is a really big part of recovery and dealing with treatment. How did music directly play into, to use a silly word, how does music play into your own recovery and your own journey?
Interestingly enough, we've had a
answers.
relationship with the American Music Therapy Association for about 30 years. And accidentally, we met the head of AMTA at the Grammy Awards in 1997 when we got our first Grammy nomination. We were all standing and ticketing together, and they looked at us and they said, oh, we're your big fans. We're from AMTA in Silver Spring and blah, blah, blah. Well, we came home and went and had lunch together, and the next thing you know, the next year, we did some workshops at AMTA. And then about 20 years ago, maybe a little bit less, we came to them with an idea. We took them out to lunch and we threw some ukuleles on the lunch table and we said, this is the future of music therapy. Every music therapist needs to know how to play guitar. They don't have to be brilliant, but they need to know how to play guitar. And this is your little guitar that travels everywhere, and they even have sanitizable ones, blah, blah, blah. It became a huge thing. I think we appeared there 15 years in a row. We still do workshops for them. I can tell you right now that if I was to start over in the music world, I might become a music therapist. Love it to pieces. In terms of how it has influenced Marcy, why don't you talk about
What was that original question?
How music has helped you through your own cancer journey and through your own treatment, how music factored in. I know you talk a lot about how you use like memes and created art and shared like humorous clips of yourself, humorous photos of yourself throughout the treatment. I love the Uncle Fester photo, recreating a picture of Uncle Fester with the light bulb. But how did music factor into that?
Music has been a part of my life since I can remember. I mean, I remember the first time I really saw a person play guitar up close, and it was my aunt who lived across the street from us, and I was a baby. I didn't have language yet, but I remember standing up and holding on to the edge of her bed, and she sat on the bed and played the guitar, and I just loved it. But there's something about a musical instrument. For me, it was the guitar that really first rang true. All I had to hear was one note, and it's just like it went right through my soul and felt calming and beautiful, and I just could relate to it. So it's like having a language. Like, I think in many ways, music is my primary language. I might communicate better through music than I do verbally sometimes.
I agree.
But to have your primary language taken away, music is how for me, it's how I connect with myself. It's how um, I express inner thoughts. I express joy, depth by studying, communicate with friends by playing together, communicate with audiences, and teaching. Also, I love teaching. But to have that taken away, I didn't lose everything. I still had my ability to think, even though my brain was cloudy. So I thought about music, and I thought about some new approaches um, to teaching that I use still. Um, but it was heartbreaking for me, really. Um, I felt very, very lonely. It's almost like if I was being picked up in incredible pain and put in a foreign country where nobody could talk to me but Cathy. Um, it was totally different. Um, I don't wish that on anybody. But then I'd look at people who you always look around. In music, I try not to ever encourage competition because I think the musicality and the soul of it can go right out the window. I always advise players not to compare themselves to anybody else because if you do, it can ruin you. There's always somebody who doesn't play well enough, and then you might get an attitude better than you, and then there are people better than you, and then you might feel bad about yourself. Um, but I really encourage people not to do that. But I couldn't help it with cancer sometimes. If there was a woman talking about she couldn't pick up her baby, I thought, my God, that's the worst thing ever. Or I'd see a person, an elderly person, in chemo alone, and wonder how they do at home, and wonder how they could open their pill bottles and things. So it is hard not to compare, but anytime you hear the word cancer in any form, it's bad. Some people tell you stories because they think that you suffered more than they did, and but it's sad every time.
And I think, the power of what you were talking about earlier, not only digging into your own community, but creating a community where you're sharing the film and connecting people to resources. I always say, like, this is a club that you never wanted to be a part of, but once you're in it, like, you have the most extraordinary people that have been to hell and back, and no one else understands apart from other survivors and their caregivers. Like, it's a community that we never asked to be in this club, but now we're in it, and we got to be here for each other.
and
Absolutely.
and we do get it, and there's no way anybody else can understand it. They might think they do. I've had people come up to me and say, well, stay positive, and then they turn around and walk away. It's like you need to know how to stay positive. You need to know how to stay connected with people. Or may you learn and grow from this experience. Well, you're going to learn and grow from the experience.
May you
but,
just walk away and
know,
not give me that
yeah,
shit.
may you just stop talking.
May you just
That's
stop.
for your card.
Oh, that card. May you just stop talking. You won. But at the same time, I want to give a big hats off to these cancer support communities because they are run by people who've been there, done that. Almost all of them offer free services. Our local Hope Connections for Cancer Support, we did our Maryland premiere of All Wigged Out for them as a fundraiser, and we raised $13,000. And
Wow.
their motto is no one should go through cancer alone. And they have phenomenal now both in person and virtual programming that we're taking advantage of and that we love. And I love that it's there.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's pretty easy to find cancer support communities. And now, if you live too far away from them, they're all offering virtual stuff. And the power of staying positive, the power of meditation, the power of Reiki. These are all things you can try. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't work for you, move on to the next thing,
You
But
can write a show about your experiences and film it and share it with
and share it with the
people
world.
worldwide.
And I also want to thank in this process our supporters because we know how to produce a record. We've produced over 150 albums, 51 of them are our own. We didn't know anything about how to make a film. We've done it a little bit in the past, recording some live shows, but this is a whole different level. And we squeezed water out of the rock the way folk singers do. We raised $85,000 on GoFundMe. And then it cost about $120,000 to do. We put our own sweat equity into it, some of our own money, and then we got some other contributions from people because we believed in it. We believed in what this story had to tell and do. It is not just for cancer patients. It is not just for survivors. It is not just for caregivers. The American Cancer Association says, and also so does the book The Emperor of All Maladies, a brilliant book on the history of cancer and its treatments. By 2030, 1 in 2 Americans will be diagnosed with cancer. Get informed. You're going to, if you don't get cancer, and I hope you do not, you're going to be friends or loved ones or family with somebody who deals with cancer. And you want to be the best that you can be to help them get through this. And that's, secondly, we need some of these bright scientists and advocates working harder on how we clean up the environment and get rid of some of this stuff that is making cancer so prevalent. But in the meantime, this is coming for all of us, either indirectly through our communities or directly to ourselves. And we need to be empowered to deal with it. And I think that is, it's a sad but important message. And so I feel like All Wigged Out helps us become empowered, whether you're a caregiver or a family member or a buddy or a work buddy or the cancer patient. And that's what we're really after. And when you're done, you're still going to be smiling and you're going to see what's possible and that people get through this and they live their happy lives and they know deeply about things that they never wanted to know about. And that's okay. That's very human.
This film is not a cathartic experience for me. It's it's really an intentional experience because I want it to be helpful for people. It's not helpful for people for us to go for shock value or to leave people down or go to a really dark place because we're already in a dark place. And if we haven't been into that dark place, we'll know what it is at some point in life in some kind of way. But hopefully, if we're there, we'll have some skills to get out of it and to control it. I've been asked over and over, how does it feel? How did it feel to me to make the film in terms of acting in it, in terms of my emotion, and it felt powerful. Many people expected me to really wallow in this, but I didn't do that when I was going through treatment. I mean, I did a couple times. Everybody does, but in general, what you do is you may be surprised that you woke up in the morning, and you may get up and do some things for a while, and then you may have to go back to bed. Things hurt, of course they do, but you do the best you can. So I guess I really want this to be an empowering experience for everybody who watches it, whether they're talking to a person with cancer or a cancer survivor, taking care of someone, or if they are themselves, or just to have this knowledge in their back pocket, and also hopefully to be entertained by the music and the comedy.
Yeah. Oh, I think what's really beautiful about this film is that I think anyone is lucky to have both of you as part of their cancer journey. And now with this film, that you can be a part of someone's journey now, because the humor and the warmth and the joy that you both exude in life, and the way you've applied that to the terrible experiences that you're going through are so moving and so inspiring to like bring that joy into our own experiences. I think that's really very, very powerful.
Well, this has been a
thank you. That's
wonderful
beautiful.
conversation, and we've totally loved it.
Thank you so much. So All Wigged Out is available to stream on Broadway on demand via your local library on Hoopla, and also available on DVD. And the album is available via Amazon and Bandcamp. And I'll have links to all of that in the show notes.
That's great. And you can find all things All Wigged Out at cathymarcy.com/allwiggedout.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. The Filmed Live Musicals podcast is created and edited by your host, Luisa Lyons. FilmedLiveMusicals.com is where musicals come home. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. A shout out and all the thank yous to our wonderful patrons: Josh Brandon, Geraldine Brewer, Belinda Broido, Andy Capone, Elliot Charles, Alexander Dovton, Rachel Esteban, Mercedes Esteban Lyons, Hannah Graneman, James T. Lane, Allison Matthews, Al Monaco, David Negrin, Jesse Rabinowitz and Brenda Goodman, David and Catherine Rabinowitz, Joe Tilliston, and Beck Twist. Patrons generously provide financial support to preserve the history of filmed stage musicals and the creation of one easy place to find them all. If you would like to support the site, receive early access to this very podcast, and early access to site content, become a Filmed Live Musicals patron for as little as $3 a month. Visit filmedlivemusicals.com to learn more. If you like what you hear, please leave a review on Apple Music. It really helps to get the word out about the show. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and thanks for listening.